Hey, welcome back. Yvonne Wakefield's YouTube channel. I read from my Babe in the Woods book series about the log cabin I built. We're finishing up with the Path of Totality, which is the third in the series. I was this like 18-year-old chick, and I went up in the woods and didn't know what I was doing, and I built this log cabin. I still have it, and I'm just like now only 28, so it's been a few years. But there's a thing about self-reliance because it's totally off the grid. It was off the grid before the term was even popularized. So I split wood, I get the water from the creek with buckets. Up until I had a second hip replacement, I used to go up and clean the chimney and do all the roof stuff. So it's like my body is my machine and I drive it to work there. Well, last week I went whitewater rafting with some friends on the White Salmon River, and we went over Hewsome Falls. And you know, when if I've whitewater rafted before, so like right before you're gonna go over the falls, you hunker down on the bottom, you put your paddle over here, you hunker down on the bottom, you hold on. Well, I got ejected. Actually, 3 of the 4 of us got ejected. We all got saved, but in the process, I cut my rotator cuff. So it's like my left arm is pretty much useless. And I was up at the cabin, I just got back yesterday. I couldn't split wood. I couldn't use my chainsaw. I had to hire somebody to use my weed whacker because I didn't want the weeds around the cabin. And to get wood up the stairs at the cabin, I had to put them in the right arm and come up. So it was an interesting tale. And I remember this friend of mine years ago. It was like right after my husband died. Her husband died too, and they were ranchers in Montana. And we were talking, and she said, I cannot get hurt. I cannot get hurt. Because when you're hurt, your whole world collapses around you. You don't have anybody to pick up the pieces. So that's an interesting thing about my vulnerability. So what I used to do on a regular basis at the cabin, I couldn't because I tore my rotator cuff. Other than that, I'm fine. Teddy's here. Zachary's here. Oh, and I want to tell you, in 2 weeks, I'll be in Northern California at the Mendocino Arts Center on July 11th. I'll be having an opening, kind of a mini retrospective of my work up there. So if anybody's in Mendocino, California in July, please stop by. Our tour is going to put that link on the website. So last week, I was reading from Musing Around, and it's like, what do you do up at the cabin when it rains for 3 or 4 days? I came back early. I was up there for 3 days, but I came back after 2 because it rained so hard, and there was sleet that hail that made it look like it was snow. And when you're in the cabin 24/7, after a few days it gets old. So anyway, I came back a day early. The last chapter was, what do I do when you're at the cabin, when it's raining? You read, you write, you draw, you write, you read. And I talked about the spirit of George O'Keeffe. And I mentioned that George O'Keeffe died in 1896. No, it was 1986. So that's a clarification. I talked about Emily Carr, James Thurber, some of the artists that inspired me. And then a blind man bought a painting at the county fair I did. So we're going to get into tonight called Freedom. Remember, I'm up at the cabin by myself. It's in the summer. And these new people, I sold 40 acres to these people. And they built a cabin up there. Not a cabin, like a huge house, but it was log, one of those prepackaged log things. So freedom. Is freedom just another word for nothing left to lose? Or is it another word for who, what, where, and like my new patron, that's the blind man who bought my art, how you choose? The freedom my mother knew in the 1950s was of a country settling into a new norm after experimental and then intentional atomic bomb drops. That post-war economy put a car in every garage, a chicken in every pot, and an electric can opener on the kitchen counter of every nuclear family. Freedom in the 60s and 70s allowed the daughters of these girdled mothers to burn their bras, drop acid, find their own way, the cult of the month club, choose pregnancy or not, or opt out of Girl Scouts. Is freedom defined or redefined by the parameters of a year, decade, or any modicum of time? I wonder while stretching out after a run and hanging backward over the porch rail, watching a cumulus cloud mount, rise, and blow apart like soap suds in a cobalt basin. Whatever. Freedom to me is how I choose to use this moment, and right now it is mucking through the mire, clinging to thoughts, hindering this sleight of mind. Today on the mountain, I find freedom in my choice of an inexpensive yet full-bodied Chardonnay. Liberation in the dexterity of uncorking it and choosing to let it breathe, as opposed to decanting it immediately, giving us both the time to nose piney air and the latitude to think about the neighbors. A few years before, I'd sold an older ranching couple my lower 40 acres, where they built a prepackaged log palace compared to my Lincoln log home. Selling half of my property for more than I paid for the entire 80 acres afforded me the freedom to pay for groceries, gasoline, property taxes, and vet visits for whatever pets I cared for at that time. That fiduciary exchange meant my freedom away from people had changed. The closest people now were not 3 miles away, but a quarter mile away. Leo and Harriet Anderson ran a high desert ranch about a 2-hour drive from their new forested retreat. Relief from the sagebrush and the alkaline heat was perhaps motivation for them to build by the shaded creek, the same one that cut through my lower acreage. Their decision to purchase that adjoining property was motivated by Leo's wanting to generate electricity from the creek. Every inch he would fight me for, he said kind of seriously, because he needed all the flow he could harness to run a generator to power their place. The purchase of my land was also driven by the discovery that the well he drilled for plumbing their home had been developed within my boundary the summer before, perhaps making him question, 1, do we remove the well and suck up the expense? 2, do we defend ourselves from a land theft lawsuit? 3, do we buy the land we trespassed on? Their third choice allowed them the freedom to live with a constant source of gravity-fed water with a clear conscience. For me, the purchase meant I lost some of the ground I took for granted, now marked by the sledge-hammered red boundary line survey stake in sight of the cabin steps. Cooling down after the forest run, I was contemplating pouring a glass of Chardonnay, which by that time was breathing easily on its own. But I declined the temptation, knowing it would still be there patiently waiting for me after a neighborly visit I had promised. At the creek, I wedged the bottle between rocks to chill and rinsed out my sweaty running top. Since my mid-30s, when maturity and the forces of nature joined hands, I've been wearing a sports bra whenever I run around the mountains, not so much for modesty as for the support it offered on bouncy elk trails. In my youth of bare-breasted running, I'd also enjoyed dashing about without shoes until a rock punctured, hobbled my titillating gait. After my most recent trust run, thanks to a solar shower, I was squeaky fresh. The Nike open back black sports bra hung to dry on a nail on the porch rail. Only an hour before, it was sweat-soaked as I was when I unexpectedly encountered Harriet and Leo in their hybrid four-wheel drive. Leo pushed a button inside the rig so Harriet could speak through the passenger window. I'd only met them a few times before during real estate negotiation and had forgotten she had pink hair, or tangerine, or pumpkin spice hair. It was hard to tell a permy hue apart from beauty or beast bandaged up in an army green bandana bow tied around her forehead. They were coming up to clean for a garden party next Saturday, Harriet said, over their yippy poodle with its rusty stains under its eyes. Harriet's words contained gloating around garden party because they sounded proper in these parts where propriety was eternally on the back burner and never turned on, at least in my case. Well, maybe with a few exceptions, My black Nike running bra matched my black Nike shorts with the white piping haute couture compared to the denim cutoffs I first wore when I ran topless. Leo looked over the steering wheel and smiled because with 2 hearing aids, he couldn't hear over the idling engine, the whining dog, and his wife repeating with airs, "Garden party." Garden party, my butt. The nearest blooming patch around here was in a town 13 miles away. Harriet must have been trying to impress herself because Leo appeared as disinterested as I was, trying not to appear put out by having to stop my run to listen to bluster. I knew Harriet was waiting for a response like, "Oh, a garden party, how nice." But I said nothing because first, she didn't invite me, and second, I knew she couldn't cultivate color to compare to the closest genuine garden a half marathon run away, pruned and staked behind a white picket fence. Maybe Leo knew what he was doing behind the wheel, but he had no suspicion or maybe no interest in what he was getting into. A precursor to throwing Harriet's garden party meant first opening up their vacation home after it had been closed all winter. Then there was the matter of moving the mounding topsoil and poking in seeds or starts that would blossom in time to impress guests. "Come on down for a visit," he said, one corner of Leo's mouth arched in a semi-smile he really wanted to cultivate. Squeaky clean and content to watch clouds scumble overhead, I was still contemplating continuing my porch-side visit with Chardonnay and forgetting about my neighbors. But in my book, a promise is a promise, no matter how much I'm into fulfilling it. It was nearing the start of a proper cocktail hour when I started walking down the mountain. And if the Andersons were not teetotalers, they would have offered me more than a glass of water they could not even extend after I arrived on foot. Harriet is shaking a rug over the porch rail and does not even say hi when she sees me, but whimpers. "We don't have any water inside. The valve is broken. The water heater is out of propane. We have to get water from the spigot outside." She gives me the kind of look that takes over her face when the end of the world is declared and then goes inside expecting me to follow. We stand by the kitchen sink and it's colder inside than it is outside. Logs are fantastic natural insulators, in this case refrigerating a long winter in addition to preserving March, April, and May. "Where's that husband when I need him?" Harriet twists the handle of the faucet as if sheer will squeeze a drop out of that faucet, dry as a desert they left hours ago. "Leo," she yells at least twice, receiving no reply. She shrugs, and I follow her back outside. It is warmer there, and my freshly washed hair airs herbal essences in the same sun, illuminating rainbow highlights in Harriet's hair. She continues complaining that they had just arrived and now had to go to town to get a new valve and arrange to fill the propane tank to establish a bank of hot water needed to swab the place clean. "Not to rub it in," I say, "maybe you should get a solar shower. At least you'd have some hot water." She twists her head, kind of like I've seen white-faced owls do. Her wide, unblinking eyes messaging me, "How can you talk about bathing when my world has come to an end?" But I felt it necessary to explain. "They're really easy. I fill mine in the creek and then set it in the sun for a while. The water heats up, sometimes too hot. Then I hang the bag from a nail on the porch and stand under it and open the head on the hose. I trickle my fingers through my fragrant mane, prove the point of renewably sourced hygiene." Maybe in the back of my mind, I was hoping Harriet would catch on that a generator, propane heater, and pump are not all that necessary, given that the sun and fire are all that is really needed to heat water to clean. I'm contemplating telling her about brewing tea in a clear water-filled set jar in the sun, but decide to keep my mouth shut because she is a teetotaler after all. Then, as if bored with my advising diatribe, Harriet changes the topic. "Seen any bear up at your place?" Her eyes focus on the green bat and board outhouse across the road. She will have to use that until their indoor flush toilet is primed and ready to go, and maybe she isn't easy about baring her rear when bear are near. "No." One rolled a stump right out in the middle of the drive, and they're rolling rocks and tearing stuff into pulp like mad down here. Leo must have removed the stump, or I was looking down the wrong stretch because my view was clear. I was going for a walk last night. I turned to Harriet, who seemed to chill out a bit, though her hair color has not. But halfway down the road, I heard something in the bush, so I decided I didn't feel like walking. I forgot to pack my gun, I said. Oh, Leo brought his, Harriet replies, as nonchalantly as past the salt. A pistol, big enough to do a bear harm. I just used mine to scare them away. I cock my finger and aim into the air. Harriet traces the imaginary bullet I've lodged into a filmy raft of cirrus clouds and says, if I get close enough to scare a bear, I want that bear scared dead. Leo may not be as deaf as he seems. Maybe he only has selective hearing around Harriet because he comes up on the porch with a plumber's wrench in his wrench-nicked hand, leans his hip into the railing and stares straight into my eyes. What kind of pistol do you have? I asked. .228 Magnum, he replies in a voice that jumps and starts like an old truck engine. He sets the wrench on the railing, looks perplexed, then corrects his accounting. No, a .325 Magnum, he tries to clarify in words that fall off his tongue like spare parts he can't afford to lose. Without further ado, he walks over to the hybrid, opens the passenger door, and reaches in. Harriet tilts her whole body sideways and whispers behind his back. He's not all there since he went to the hospital last winter, internal bleeding. His stools was black. Leo returns to the porch with a .228 or .325 Magnum, takes it out of the holster and hands it to me. I hope it's not loaded. Harriet picks up Puddles and holds it panting against her maternal breast. Load it full, Leo answers, not taking his eyes off the gun in my grip. It's a lunker, I say, figuring it with kid gloves. Good kickback, I ask, as my eye needles through the sight at a target, a Ponderosa 100 feet away. Yep. Shot it 181 times in 8 years. You count each shot? I'm thinking there still must be a lot left in Leo's fading memory if he can put a tally on all that triggering. No, I count how many boxes of bullets I go through. Leo leaves me again and returns with a cardboard sleeve covering a white carton filled with silver bullets, nesting orderly as factory-produced chicken eggs. He keeps trying to talk to me, but Harriet keeps interrupting his sentences, which when Leo tries to restart them is like trying to get an old truck engine lacking all its parts to turn over. His lips sputter, then his voice goes dead, and he puts his mind back on the starter. I'd really like to prime his pistons so I could sit back and listen. In stories, the kind of people like Leo tell, there are truths not voiced in microchipped rangelands. The sun is still high, but pushing the atmosphere into the ozone crush. I sign a sign to put my foot on the gas. Have a great garden party. I wave goodbye and start walking up the cabin. Out of eyesight and earshot, I start singing, love is a nose and you better not pick it, and trip over a clogged water bar. Got to dig it out, I remind myself, dust off my knees and continues, only grows if you drink wine. Freedom is singing out of earshot of your closest neighbors. Next Saturday came and went. I never saw evidence that a garden party had been planned, planted, tilled, or covered up. Harriet and Leo must have left soon after they arrived, as the bird splats on the aqua-painted propane tank had not been chipped off by refilling it. The stump Harriet said had been rolled in the road by bears was sitting on the left side of the short driveway. Red ants were pouring out like syrup through the porous pulp, enticing to bears, though this time they had not clotted apart, perhaps because it had already been marked. Knew you can use them, Harriet and Leo, was written in precise cursive on a white piece of paper tucked under a box holding Aladdin lamp mantles. In the court of our porch-side confab, I'd mentioned I burned through my last and could not find mantle replacements, even at true value. Harriet looked at me like I was living in the Dark Ages. We light with generated electricity, she said, with the same haughtiness behind her declarations of a garden party. And that's where we left that piece of conversation Leo had witnessed as he leaned against a mortise porch rail, listening. That evening, before pouring Chardonnay's second breath, I removed the dry Nike running bra from a nail. Inside the cabin, I lit a new mantle, fragile as spun glass, and read freely in the light of my choice. All right, next time we're going to read the last entry before we get into part 2 of this book. So as always, Kay Webster has narrated all these books on audio. She does it professionally. I do it in little jumps and starts and add vignettes. If you've enjoyed this reading, follow the YouTube, the podcast, tell your friends, subscribe, buy the books. They're available wherever books are sold. Audio, real books. And, ooh, see, my arm is bad. And ebooks, too. Anyway, there's like 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts out where I live right now, and they made a big fire last night. So to all those firefighters who fought that, stay hydrated. See you next time. Bye-bye.